Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about Dutch composer Julius Röntgen. Now, if you don't know his music, you are missing something special. Röntgen lived from 1855 to 1932. Wonderful period, you'll admit. Late Romantic, early 20th century. Lots of good stuff was going on around then. He was marvelous. He came from a musical family. He had 5 sons who all became musicians. He absolutely lived, breathed, and dripped music. It's just amazing. And he wrote tons of it, tons and tons and tons of it. There's about 25 symphonies, tons of chamber music. He wrote concertos for everything. He had 16 string trios. It's just amazing how much music the man wrote. And is it all great? Yeah, who knows? No one's heard all of it. But everything that I've heard has a couple qualities that I think are outstanding. First of all, he had a sense of humor, a wonderful, wonderful sense of humor. And his music reveals that. Second, he's healthy. He's a healthy composer. He loved music, and he loved expressing himself in tonal melody for the most part, but he was also a superb contrapuntist, as we will hear. And he was friends with Brahms, he was friends with Grieg, he was friends with everybody. And he's usually compared to Brahms and Grieg, which I find a little bit misleading. I mean, the Grieg comparison is somewhat apt in that he was, more than anything else, a romantic nationalist composer, and he was very interested in folk music and using folk melodies in his music. The Brahms comparison, perhaps in some of his chamber music, but I don't think he was a conservative in that vein. He was not a classical formalist the way Brahms was, not by any stretch of the imagination, but he did believe in tonal harmony. And because our music history is generally based on what kind of harmony composers used, to the exclusion of everything else, that he's listed as a conservative. And he freely admitted it and celebrated it, but he really wasn't. He really wasn't. He was a free spirit who happened to like what he liked. And that's why I respect him, because he knew what he could do. He knew what he did best, and he stuck with it. It's that simple. He didn't write a symphony until 1910, actually. I mean, one that he classified as his symphony number 1. Of course, after that, he wrote like 20 some odd more in the years remaining to him. But he was interested in everything. He thought, the 20th century's greatest composer was Stravinsky. He was not conservative in his taste, but he was extremely sensible about what he could do. He was not conservative in his orchestration, in his use of timbre and color. He was an absolute original, I think. And I don't think his originality, because he was a harmonically conservative tonal composer, I don't think his real originality gets any credit whatsoever. And that's why he's largely ignored. That and the fact that later in life he seemed to be a happy guy who just wrote music for himself, and he didn't really care about getting it performed, which certainly doesn't help, raising your status. That and the fact that he was, living in the Netherlands in that environment, which perhaps didn't encourage an international platform as much as it would have had he been someplace else. But, who knows? The bottom line is we have this fabulous music, and CPO has been doing an edition. I mean, there's like more than a dozen CDs out so far. I mean, here's a bunch of them. I mean, you've got, something like 3 or 4 piano concertos. I think he wrote 7 in all. And he's got a couple violin concertos and 3 cello concertos and whole piles of symphonies and suites based on folk tunes. And I mean, just all kinds of really, really cool stuff. And I want to introduce him to you by talking about one disc in particular, which I think is sort of the ideal Röntgen starter disc. I mean, you got to start somewhere, right? And it's this one. I mean, all these have beautiful, beautiful Van Gogh covers, which I think in Dutch is pronounced something like Van Gogh. But, Van Gogh. We anglicize here. So I don't want to hear any crap from you people, especially any of my Dutch listeners. We know how it's supposed to go. Anyway, here it is. This disc contains, are you ready? Symphony number 10, which is called the Waltz Symphony, the Sinfonietta Humoristica, which I think has an irresistibly enticing title, and 3 preludes and fugues, which are not what you think they are, and a suite called Oud Nederland, or Old Netherlands, which is a suite of folk dances arranged in 4-movement symphonic form. It's quite a marvelous piece. Now, these 4 pieces really do basically tell you what you need to know about Röntgen as a composer. And I want to play you little samples of each. Now, Symphony number 10 is called the Waltz Symphony. It's in a single movement. It's only 9 and a bit minutes long. And these excellent performances, by the way, they're with the Deutsche Staatsphilharmonie Rheinland-Pfalz under David Porcellin. You know, the thing about these symphonies, the late symphonies, is that they're symphonies because that's what he called them. He basically wrote single movement abstract orchestral works, and he called them symphony. That's how he did it. And they can last anywhere from 10 minutes to half an hour or so, 25 minutes. They are almost entirely marvelous. They're wonderful. And they aren't about anything other than the joy of making music. Whether they're happy or sad, they're all expressive. Most of them are joyous. The guy had just, it seems to me, one of the healthiest personalities since Haydn. He really did. His music makes you feel good about the universe. And I think we could use some of that. I really do. I want to play you a little bit of the Waltz Symphony. Now, this 10-minute compact symphony doesn't start with a waltz. It's not facile in the way you think it is. The waltz slowly emerges from these surrounding orchestral textures. I mean, it runs into things. There's a fugue at the beginning. The music is not cheap, but eventually it becomes giddier and giddier, and so this waltz just erupts. And I'm going to play you the moment when the waltz erupts, and it's just fabulous. Listen to this. Isn't that fun? I mean, don't you just want to hear the whole thing? I mean, that's the idea. It's delicious, absolutely delicious. And you can hear from the orchestration, from the use of the xylophone, the percussion, and the scoring, and he had no inhibitions when it came to writing for instruments. He wasn't conservative in that sense at all. He was fully conversant with what was going on in the musical world around him. He even wrote a song cycle based on Hans Betke's The Chinese Flute, setting some of the same poems that Mahler did in Das Lied von der Erde. I mean, this guy had just an omnivorous musical appetite. And if his style didn't, evolve or become avanti or avant-garde, I mean, who cares? It's good music. And good music is good music. It doesn't matter what style it's in or who wrote it or when they wrote it or anything like that. So next we have the Sinfonietta Humoristica, another 4-movement mini symphony. I play you a bit of the 3rd movement. It's not labeled anything. It's because there's sort of a scherzo type thing, and it doesn't make any difference. The Humoristica part comes from the music's self-evident wit. This is not slapstick. This is wit, and it's musical wit. And that means that it has its own business to mind on the way to being something that simply makes you smile. Here you go. Next, we have 3 preludes and fugues. Now, as I said, Röntgen was he was a big Bach guy. He was a very fine contrapuntist. And these preludes and fugues are really, really beautiful, somewhat impressionistic, fabulously scored. And I'm going to play you a bit of the first prelude, just a little bit of it. It is dreamy and wonderful, and it shows just how free-thinking he was. I mean, really, as a composer, because the sound and the timbres, and it's just marvelous, absolutely marvelous. So here's a bit of the first prelude. And last but not least, there is the splendid 4-movement suite, Old Netherlands. This is an arrangement of folk tunes. It's the same thing, similar to, for example, Grieg's Norwegian dances, or his symphonic dances, or any of those pieces based on, like Dvorak did with his Czech suite, stuff like that. It's one of those. It's a straight out, unashamed, romantic nationalist extravaganza, and it's in the very best style of such things. It really is. It doesn't stand to be, I mean, it withstands competition from anything written by any of those major romantic nationalist composers. The settings are loving and affectionate and beautifully done. And here's the conclusion of the entire suite. It's just marvelous. Here you go. So, is there any possible reason you can come up with why you would not want to sample some more of Julius Röntgen? Again, that was the Deutsche Staatsphilharmonie Rheinland-Pfalz under David Porcellin. And wow, what a fine composer this is. It is incredible that he is so neglected. We are thrilled that CPO has recorded so much of his music. This is your opportunity, folks. It's out there. It's available. If you like him, there's a good, hefty chunk of music that you can get your hands on, and you will enjoy it forever. I guarantee it. So keep on listening, folks, and get going with Julius Röntgen. Take care.